Chapter 14. There were no more disco lights dancing in the train car when Jaime opened his eyes again. It must be nighttime. He wasn't sure if he had fallen asleep or fainted from the heat, had no way of knowing how long they'd been in this cage. The last thing he remembered was finding it hard to focus and wondering if he would ever stop sweating. He wasn't sweating now. In fact, he felt a bit chilly, even in the boxcar's stuffy air. He found a shirt he hoped was his and put it on. The faint smell of Mama's soap embraced him. Jaime, Angela got up next to him. Si, soy yo. Good. She made stretching moans and scooted back to lean against the metal side, which had cooled down to the point it no longer burned to touch it. Hungry. How much longer are we in here for? No clue, but the food won't last another day if it hasn't rotted already. They didn't have much. One tamale and a couple of abuela's tortillas, which tasted a bit off. If he could see them, he wouldn't be surprised if they had green spots. But since he couldn't see the spots, he pretended he couldn't taste them. In terms of food, they had nothing else. If they got off the train alive, how easy would it be to get? The safe house in Lecheria would probably provide them with something while they were there, but what about after? Others in the boxcar began shuffling around, waking up from the heat-induced slumber. Plastic bags rumpled, zippers unzipped, and water bottles crackled as people dug into their limited food stores. But the noises didn't last long. Most people, it seemed, had little food left, if any. Mama, I think this man is dead, the little girl said. A hush swept through the train, as if someone had turned off the sound to everyone's voices. Where is he? The deep-voiced bandana man grumbled. Aquí, Ava said, her voice high and squeaky in comparison. Everyone kept quiet as the man went to the fallen body's side. A slap across the face rang in the train car, and a few seconds later the bandana man grumbled again. I can feel a pulse, but only barely. I think he got heat stroke. Anyone have some water left? Jaime shook his plastic water bottle. Nothing. Next to him, he heard Angela gone through the same motions. Hers was empty as well. Other people shuffled through their belongings and said no, but some said nothing. Jaime knew they were saving it for themselves. When no one volunteered any water, the unconscious man was moved and everyone kept their distance. If the intense heat hadn't drained everyone's energy, Jaime might have worried about a fight breaking out, or at least someone stealing any remaining water. But just breathing seemed to be all everyone could manage. Every so often, the deep-voiced man went over to the body and responded each time with the same phrase, still with us. Jaime opened his eyes again when the train rocked side to side as it switched tracks and slowed down. Just another stop in this endless journey, he told himself. He tried to shift himself into a more comfortable position. After all, there wasn't much else to do but sleep. And it did pass the time quicker. Instead, he woke up completely. It was night again, or maybe still, and he found himself staring at the flickering exterior lights on the metal walls. The sound of metal clanking again against metal woke everyone up. Cars were being removed or added to the train. Faint voices yelled indistinguishable orders. Jaime refused to get his hopes up. Were they? Could they? They had stopped for hours, it seemed, before the metal bar screeched and clanged as it slid across the train car door. A second later, the bright light almost blinded them, and the freshest, sweetest air filled the dark and suffocating boxcar as the door opened several meters wide. Salganse! A voice ordered them to get out. Everyone bumped into one another as they stood on weak legs, still blind from the sudden light. Jaime blinked several times. With each bat of his eyes, his vision cleared. Then he wished he were still blind. The light came from a street lamp, and it shined on an immigration officer standing outside the train. Ammunition crossed his chest like an X, and he pointed his automatic rifle into the car. It was the first time Jaime got a look at the people who shared the car with him. Those who had ridden in the van with him from Padre Kevin's were all there, as well as 20 others he didn't recognize. The looks of surprise and confusion quickly changed to fear as they realized the nightmare of being captured was real. Ivan stared at the officer in awe, while Eva clung tightly to her mama's hand and her pink blankie scrap. At least they weren't crying. I said get out, he repeated with a wave of his gun. Backpacks in place and hands clasped, Jaime and Angela slipped past the officer and out of the train car, along with everyone else. The ankle he had banged in the van gave only the slightest complaint. More pressing things were on his mind, like how badly the officers would beat them up before returning them to Guatemala, whether he and Angela would try to make the journey again and how many times they'd have to attempt it before reaching Tomas, or whether they would give up, return to their families, and accept the punishment the Alphas would give them for fleeing the gang. The officer leaned into the empty train car to poke the fainted man with his gun. What's with him? Is he dead? As if it were planned, all the passengers broke into a mad run and split in every different direction. Angela and Jaime took off through the train yard, dodging cars and going over the hitches. Shouts and gunshots rang out. Two men unloading cargo stopped to stare at them, but they neither helped nor hindered their escape. A flash of pink caught Jaime's eye. An officer had caught Eva and Ivan's mama. The scrap that remained of Eva's blankie flapped in the dim light. In the split second it took for Jaime to wonder how he could help them, the officer let them go and jogged with his gun outstretched in a completely different direction. The pink scrap disappeared into the night. Jaime smiled for a second. So there were some merciful meager officers. The cousins jumped over tracks laden with trash and junk before running out into the dark streets. After a few turns, they looked over their shoulders. No one was following them. Their ribs heaved with exhaustion as they crouched in the shadow of a stoop and caught their breath. Once calm, they met each other's eyes. All their adrenaline and nerves exploded and they clung to each other, crying and laughing, even though there was nothing funny about what had happened. Angela rested her hand against her chest. It's great feeling my heart pumping. Like being alive, Jaime agreed. Between the scorching train and the armed officer, it was a miracle they were. But let's not do it again anytime soon. If Rafa were here, he'd say that was fun, Jaime said as he straightened up. Crazy, she said with a shake of her head. We are in Lecheria, not Medias Aguas, right? Lecheria, he confirmed. They were in a borough of Mexico City, the capital, halfway through Mexico. Halfway. He smiled and pointed in the direction they had come from. I saw some signs at the rail yard while we were running from the officer. Let's find this safe house and meet up with the others. Thanks to Angela making them memorize the safe houses back at Padre Kevin's and the maps in Jaime's sketchbook, they found the low-roofed cinder block house much easier than they had found Padre Kevin's Iglesia de Santo Domingo. Except this safe house was closed. Boards covered the windows and garbage wedged between a wrought iron gate and the locked front door. They tried the gate and the windows. There was no secret entrance, no notice saying where a different safe house could be found. Nothing except a lot of graffiti on the walls, most of it bad words, and all of it directed to Centro Americano scum. The dryness of Jaime's throat scratched as he swallowed hard. No point in whining about how much he had been counting on some water and food. Angela must have felt the same. Jaime wondered if now would justify using some of the money in their jeans that Tia had said to keep for absolute emergencies. He supposed not. It didn't matter anyway. No store was open. They waited a bit in hopes that their friends would appear. This was where, after all their careful do-not-get-caught planning, they had agreed to meet, but they saw no one. I don't think they're coming tonight. Jaime bit his lip, trying to remain optimistic. Maybe they were left behind in Medias Aguas. Angela's face pinched with worry, but her tone forced optimism. You're right, and we shouldn't stay here much longer. We're too exposed. Jaime agreed with a kick at some garbage on the street. He wanted to wait longer, just in case their friend showed up, but whatever, or whoever, caused the safe house to close, could come back. What should they do? Where should they go? The plan B they had arranged was to wait a couple of days at the safe house if the others were delayed. They hadn't thought of an alternate plan for a closed safe house. Where were their friends now? Still in Arriaga, not having been able to get on the train? Waiting for them in Medias Aguas? In a white van driving them back to the Guatemalan border? Images of plastic men toppling off toy trains filled Jaime's head, except the plastic men had faces of real boys. He'd been stooping to hope he'd ever see them again. From one street over came the roar of drunken men yelling into the night. The hairs on the back of Jaime's neck rose. He grabbed Angela's hand. Neither one needed any further encouragement to get out of there, and fast. Should we go back to the train yard? Don't we have another train to take us to Ciudad Juarez? He hated the idea of going back where the armed officers were, and hated even more the idea of getting locked in another sweltering train car. But anything was better than standing outside a safe house that was no longer safe. Right? Maybe we should skirt around the station. Ask where we can find Santos, Angela said, and continued hurrying back the way they came, away from the roar of drunken men. Jaime looked at the sky. Light pollution and cloud cover prevented him from seeing the stars. The sun hadn't even started to come up. It's probably safer to do that during the day, don't you think? To scope out the area and find the smuggler? The shatter of breaking glass, and a few seconds later police sirens made them walk faster. But where are we going to spend the night? Angela asked. That was the ultimate question. The neighborhood they were in was definitely poor. Tiny houses needed more than paint to make them look nice. The windows that didn't have bars were too small to fit even a small kid. The few cars parked on the side of the streets were old. Jaime doubted anyone would let them stay in their house, or even patio, especially after being woken up in the middle of the night. There were trees, but none of them were big enough to climb for shelter. Lecheria wasn't one of the safest places to be. Still, there had to be some place, somewhere, that would be safe for the night. His eyes landed on a small white car with more rust than paint parked along the side of the road. Usually it was Miguel who paid attention to cars, but this one made Jaime give it a second look. He grabbed Angela's elbow to stop her. Do you think you can fit under this car? Angela crouched down to peer at it. The distance between the street and the frame wasn't much more than mid-leg. Barely, but what if the owner started up? Jaime pointed at the dirt and trash wedged between the wheels and the curb. It hasn't been driven in a while, a few weeks at least, probably more. I guess it'll have to do. Angela removed her bag from her back and pushed it under the old car. She got on her stomach and scooted herself under. Jaime did the same behind her. His empty stomach moaned as he lay on top of it. The street underneath the car was covered in dirt and debris with a few wrappers and cigarette butts mixed in. The tangy smell of some kind of engine fluid rose from the spot under the hood. A bang on the backside of his skull reminded him he couldn't raise his head more than a few centimeters. One hand on his bag and the other curled around Angela's. He felt strangely secure and relaxed in this dirty little car cave.